Story title, She Died for Love, but returned for truth. Before the city woke, before the smoke rose from the roadside suya stands, before the buses began to fight their way through Ojulegba's narrow veins, Mary Adebayo was already awake. She sat alone in her living room, the hum of a dying ceiling fan whispering above her, the smell of early morning rain still drifting through the open window. Her body was big. Not the kind of big that magazines praise, but the kind that Lagos men mock behind closed doors. Her hands were wide, strong, soft, the kind that had washed, fed, and built everything around her. And in those hands that morning, she held a photograph. A man smiling, arm around her shoulder, a promise in his eyes that turned out to be poison. That man was Julian, her husband, the one she trusted, the one who would later try to erase her existence. But that morning, before anyone knew what was coming, the air around her was still gentle. Mary whispered to herself, "I did everything right, everything." Then she pressed her palm on the glass frame, as if to feel warmth through it. Outside, Lagos stirred awake, generators groaning, street hawkers shouting, the city wearing its mask of ambition and hunger. Mary had once loved the city. It was where she built her business, a small food catering company in Surulere that grew from one pot of jollof rice to a full industrial kitchen. She had worked like fire, fed the rich, and never cheated a soul. But beneath her success, loneliness crept like slow rain under a roof. Before now, Mary's life was not always this way. She grew up in Ajij, in a one-room apartment shared with her widowed mother and two younger brothers. Their walls were patched with old calendars and posters from election years long gone. When it rained, the zinc roof became a drum. They would set buckets under each leak and laugh when one overflowed. Those days were poor but pure. Her mother, Mama Grace, sold Accra at the junction. Every morning before sunrise, she would whisper prayers into the oil before dropping the first ball of dough. "God, let this oil bring us favor," she'd say. And sometimes it did. A customer would tip extra. A church would order in bulk. Small mercies that kept the family alive. Mary was always the helper, rolling the table to the roadside, shouting prices, wiping sweat. Her sighs made people notice her early. Some laughed, others sneered. But Mama Grace always said, "Your body is not your shame, Mary. It's your story. Carry it with pride." So she did. Through mockery, heartbreak, and poverty, Mary learned to walk with quiet dignity. Her dream was simple. A kitchen of her own, a business that fed the city that once mocked her. She kept one object all her life, a small wooden spoon, chipped on the side. It was her mother's last gift before she died. When things got hard, Mary would touch the spoon and remember her mother's voice. If you can feed people, you can heal them. After Mama Grace's death, Mary worked in hotels, serving men who didn't see her. She endured insult from chefs who called her Mama Elephant. But she kept working, saving, building, believing. Years passed, and slowly money came. One customer, then 10, then 100. She bought her first van, painted her logo, Grace's Touch Catering. The same men who once ignored her began to call her Madam Mary. She became known in Surulere as the woman who turned hunger into hope. Yet at night, when the city went quiet, she felt the empty side of her bed, cold as truth. It was at a church event in Acadia, under a cracked wooden cross, that Mary first noticed Julian. He was new in Lagos, a smooth-talking man in his mid-30s, tall, charming, the kind whose smile could light up a room. He claimed to be a consultant from Abuja. Between jobs, he said, helping NGOs manage funds. That Sunday, he helped her carry trays of puff-puff after service. When one slipped, he caught it midair and laughed. "You cook like heaven's chef," he said. She blushed, unsure how to respond. For the first time in years, someone looked at her not with mockery, but with admiration. She didn't know that admiration could be a weapon, too. Julian became a frequent face. He'd show up at her shop, sometimes with flowers, sometimes just to check if you've eaten. He listened when she talked about her mother. He held her hand when she spoke about pain. And slowly, her walls began to fall. Her assistant, Toby, noticed it first. "Madam, this man, He too smooth. Be careful, oh. Mary laughed. Toby, you watch too many movies. Toby shrugged. Even movies come from true stories, Ma. But Mary was already too far in. For the first time in her adult life, she felt wanted, desired, seen. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful. Held at a small event center in Acadia. White lace, pink roses, laughter everywhere. Julian looked at her with perfect eyes when he said, "Till death do us part." Her heart trembled, not from fear, but hope. After the wedding, they moved into her duplex in Surrey. He left a small rented apartment to save costs, he said. She didn't mind. Love doesn't calculate. At least not yet. Julian didn't work much in those early months. He said Lagos was hard to break into, that contracts took time. Mary understood. She paid bills, cooked, and even added his name to her business papers for partnership's sake. It felt right. But each signature she added was a seed she didn't know she'd one day regret. Slowly, things changed. Julian started staying out late. Meetings, he said. Phone calls and whispers. Perfume that wasn't his. Then the insults began, small at first, masked as jokes. You should watch your weight, Mary. You're becoming unhealthy. She laughed it off. But at night, she cried. When he began to withdraw from her bed, she tried harder. New dresses, new recipes, even a small romantic getaway. But Julian's heart was already elsewhere, chasing another woman and a bigger dream, her inheritance. Mary had inherited her mother's land in Icoradu, property now worth millions after the New Road project. Julian knew. He began asking questions, casual, innocent. Babe, that land, you still planning to develop it? She smiled. One day, yes. He nodded, pretending not to care. But inside him, greed was already sharpening its knife. One night, she fell sick. Stomach cramps, vomiting, dizziness. Julian rushed her to hospital, played the perfect husband. Doctor said it was food poisoning. She recovered. He smiled. You have to be careful what you eat outside. She nodded, not knowing the poison came from inside her home. The second time it happened, she nearly died. The doctor suggested running tests. But Julian convinced her it was stress. He even offered to help manage her accounts while she rested. Tired and grateful, she agreed. He took full access to her bank. Her business began to show small losses she couldn't trace. Toby tried to warn her again. Madam, something no pure for this house. Mary's heart was too full of love to hear the truth. It happened on a rainy Friday. Julian offered to drive her to a business meeting near 3rd Mainland Bridge. She trusted him. The rain poured like judgment from heaven. He drove slow, talking softly. She noticed his silence, calm but strange. Then, near a dark stretch of the bridge, he stopped, pretended the car had a fault. She leaned forward to check the dashboard. That's when the blow came, hard, from behind. Darkness swallowed her. Julian dragged her body, wrapped in a black plastic sheet, to the edge. The lagoon waited, cold, silent, hungry. He whispered, Forgive me, Mary. You lived too much. Then he pushed. The splash was swallowed by thunder. Julian drove away, tears on his face, but not from guilt, from fear. He thought it was over. He thought he was free. He thought no one saw. But Lagos always sees. Even the river remembers. Hours later, somewhere near the shoreline of Makoko, a fisherman found her, breathing, barely. The plastic had torn. The river had refused her. She was half conscious, her body bruised, her face swollen, but alive. When the fisherman carried her into his hut, she whispered only one word. Julian, that night, the city slept while Mary fought for her life. And when dawn came again, something inside her had changed. The woman who once believed love could heal everything was gone. What rose from that river was truth, wearing flesh. The morning light that rose over Makoko that day was pale and broken, like the city itself. Fishermen rowed their canoes across the brown water. Smoke drifted from cooking huts, and the smell of salt and diesel filled the air. Inside one of those wooden shacks, lying on a narrow mat, Mary Adebayo opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the ceiling, wooden, cracked, trembling with every gust of wind. The second thing she saw was a young girl, maybe 14, washing a bowl beside her. The girl looked up, startled, then smiled shyly. "Auntie, you're awake." Mary tried to speak, but her throat burned. The girl ran out shouting, "Papa, she don't wake, oh." A man entered, lean, dark, calm. His name was Baba Musa, a fisherman whose canoe had become her coffin and her cradle. He knelt beside her and checked her pulse with rough, careful hands. "You're safe now. The river let you go. Rest." Mary blinked back tears. Safe? The word felt foreign. Her last memory was Julian's face, wet from rain, blank from guilt. She could still hear his whisper, "Forgive me, Mary." She stayed with Baba Musa's family for 2 weeks. The pain in her ribs made every breath feel borrowed. They nursed her with herbal tea, palm oil, and prayer. At night, the waves spoke through the walls, whispering secrets to the drowned. She didn't tell them her full story. Not yet. She said she fell from a vehicle, that robbers attacked her. It was easier than telling the truth. "My husband threw me into the lagoon." But silence has its own weight. It pressed on her chest like an invisible hand. One night, while the lantern flickered low, Baba Musa said quietly, "Whatever chased you to this river, it didn't finish you. The water don't keep who still has purpose." Those words cut deep, because inside Mary knew she was not done. She was not dead. She was only reborn. 3 weeks later, she wrapped herself in a plain wrapper, tied her scarf low, and boarded a bus to Ikorodoo, the last place Julian would think to look. She had a small bag, a few thousand naira that Baba Musa pressed into her hand, and one mission burning in her heart: to see what he had done in her absence. The bus ride felt endless. Through the window, she saw Lagos blur, beggars at junctions, billboards with fake smiles, women balancing hope and hunger on their heads. The world looked the same, but she wasn't. When she reached her old neighborhood, no one recognized her at first. Her face was swollen, her body thinner. She moved quietly, like a ghost watching her own life from a distance. From a distance, she saw her shop, Grace's Touch Catering. Open, crowded, busy. But the sign now read, Julian and Mary Foods Limited. Her name was there, but her soul was not. Inside, her former workers moved like strangers. And there, in a neat blue shirt, was Julian, laughing, shaking hands, full of fake humility. He looked alive. Too alive. Mary's knees weakened. She stood behind a tree and watched him for an hour. He was introducing himself to clients as the man continuing his late wife's dream. Her heart froze. Late wife. He told the world she was dead. The next day, she visited her lawyer, the one she had once trusted to handle her business. He was shocked to see her. "Madam Mary? Jesus Christ. We all attended your memorial. What happened?" She placed a finger on her lips. "Please, not here. Tell me everything." The lawyer explained it all. Julian reported her missing, presumed dead. After police found her car near the bridge, he presented their joint business papers and inheritance documents. He had taken everything: the land, the house, the business, legally. He even held a memorial service to honor her spirit. Mary sat still. Not a tear, not a word, just silence, the kind that can burn through walls. She rented a small one-room apartment in Ikorodoo, near her late mother's old land. She began to rebuild her strength. Each morning she exercised, ate lightly, prayed long. Each evening she watched the sunset and whispered, "You made me dead, Julian, but I'm not done yet." Her plan was simple: return quietly, gather evidence, and take back everything he stole. But she needed help, and she knew only one person who still had loyalty to her: Toby. She called him from a new number. When he heard her voice, he gasped, "Madam? Madam Mary?" "Yes, Toby. Don't shout. Just listen." They met at night, behind her old church, under the same cracked cross where she'd met Julian years ago. When Toby saw her, he fell to his knees in tears. "I thought you died." She touched his shoulder. Maybe I did, but God let me wake up for a reason. Then she told him everything, from the poison to the river. Toby's face went pale. That man is evil, Ma, but the world loves him now. He done donate food to orphanages. He day on TV. Mary smiled faintly. Then we'll let the world see his true face. Toby became her silent eyes. Every day, he sent her updates, pictures, invoices, staff lists. Through him, she learned Julian was secretly selling her land in Icoridu to foreign developers. She also discovered he had started seeing another woman, a slim, flashy banker named Cynthia. Mary began collecting evidence. Quietly, methodically, she reconnected with her lawyer, arranged for private investigations, and even reopened her bank alerts. Each transaction was a blade sharpening itself for justice. At night, she'd write notes by candlelight, short, firm lines. Never act in anger. Use his greed against him. End this with dignity. She didn't want revenge for pain. She wanted justice with peace. The kind that leaves the guilty naked before truth. One morning, Mary stood before her mirror. Her reflection startled her. Thinner, tougher, eyes deeper. She no longer looked like the woman who begged for love. She looked like the woman who buried it. She decided to change her name, at least for now. She became Grace Adelik, using her mother's first name. She registered a new business, Grace Foods Revival. Her first clients were small schools and churches in Icoridu. Word spread quickly. The woman who cooked with soul had returned. No one knew she was the same Mary Julian had killed. Within months, her kitchen came alive again. Toby managed logistics, she cooked, and together they rebuilt quietly. The aroma of fried fish and pepper soup began to rise again from her pots, like defiance turned into flavor. One afternoon, Toby came running into her shop, sweating. "Madam, something done happen, oh. What is it?" "Julian go announce big partnership with governor's office tomorrow, using your land document." Mary's hands froze over the pot. The final trigger had arrived. Her land, her name, her life, being used for politics. She smiled coldly. Good. Then let him shine bright. It's easier to see a man when he's standing in the light. That night, she stayed up writing letters, making calls, contacting a lawyer, and sending evidence to trusted journalists. The storm was coming, not from heaven, but from her own hand. The next morning, Lagos woke loud and golden. Traffic honked, megaphones screamed, and banners fluttered. Julian stood on a podium, dressed in his best bata, cameras flashing. He was shaking hands with government officials, smiling for reporters. "Mary Adebayo's legacy lives through my vision," he said proudly. And somewhere among the crowd, under a wide sun hat and dark glasses, stood Mary, alive, calm, watching. The world thought she was a ghost, a rumor, but she was real, and she was ready. She whispered softly to herself, "Let him finish his lies. The truth will speak next." That evening, a journalist published an anonymous article titled, "Did Lagos businessman build his empire on a dead woman's grave?" The story questioned Julian's sudden wealth, missing police records, and inconsistent business filings. Pictures leaked, including her signature on forged documents. Social media exploded. Julian's office phones didn't stop ringing. Cynthia left him that same night. And in the chaos, a single envelope arrived at his gate. No name, no address, containing one photograph. Mary standing beside her new shop, alive, smiling, holding a wooden spoon. Julian dropped to his knees, trembling. He whispered, "Impossible," but it wasn't. It was only the beginning. Mary didn't rush. She stayed quiet as Lagos buzzed with gossip. She watched news anchors debate the mysterious case of the resurrected wife. Some called it fake. Some called it miracle. But she didn't care for names anymore. Her focus was justice. Her lawyer filed petitions. Her accountant froze his access. Police reopened her missing person file. Julian tried to fight back, claiming mistaken identity. But DNA doesn't lie, nor does the river that refused her. The night before the public hearing, Mary sat outside her apartment, staring at the stars. Toby joined her quietly. Madam, tomorrow everything go change. She nodded. Not everything. Some scars don't fade, but I'll make peace with them. He asked softly, You go forgive him? Mary looked up at the night sky. Forgiveness isn't for him. It's for me so I can sleep again. Then she smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. Tomorrow, we don't just fight for my name, Toby. We fight for every woman Legos try to bury. The morning of the hearing broke, like a storm waiting for thunder. Clouds gathered over a cage of high court, thick and dark, as if even the sky understood that something heavy was about to happen. Vendors were already outside the gates, selling newspapers with headlines screaming, The dead wife returns. Did Julian Adebayo kill his spouse for wealth? Crowds had gathered, journalists, activists, curious Lagosians. Everyone wanted to see the woman who came back from the lagoon. Inside a black SUV parked across the street, Mary Adebayo sat quietly, her scarf wrapped tight. Toby was beside her, nervous, chewing his lip. Madam, you sure you're ready for this? Mary smiled faintly. I've been ready since the night he pushed me. She stepped out of the car. The noise outside hushed as she walked toward the courtroom. Slow, steady, alive. The cameras flashed like lightning, but she didn't flinch. For the first time in her life, she didn't hide her body, her scars, or her story. She was not a victim walking. She was truth walking on 2 feet. The courtroom smelled of old wood, sweat, and tension. Reporters filled the benches. Julian sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 lawyers, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie. When he saw her enter, his face turned white. He whispered, Mary. The lawyer beside him frowned. What's wrong? Julian couldn't answer. Mary took her seat across from him, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't break. The judge entered, stern, slow, the kind whose eyes see through performance. This court will now hear the case of Mary Adebayo versus Julian Adebayo. The whispers filled the room like rain. Mary's lawyer stood first, a calm man in his 50s, his voice clear and controlled. My lord, we present proof that the defendant, Mr. Julian Adebayo, attempted to murder his wife and falsified her death to seize her inheritance and business assets. He walked to the table and placed a file down. Inside were photographs, financial statements, and a police report reopening the missing person case. The audience leaned forward. Julian's lawyer rose, trying to sound confident. My lord, this is absurd. The plaintiff was missing for months, presumed dead. My client acted in grief, not deceit. The judge looked at Mary. Madam, please tell the court what happened on the night you disappeared. The room fell silent. You could hear the whir of a ceiling fan and the distant honk of traffic outside. Mary stood up slowly. Her voice trembled at first. That night, Julian told me we were going to a meeting near 3rd Mainland Bridge. She paused, breathing deeply. It was raining. He stopped the car, said it broke down. When I leaned forward to check the dashboard, he hit me. Gasps filled the room. Julian looked down. Mary continued, her tone gaining strength. When I woke up, I was inside plastic. I couldn't move. I heard water. I felt him drag me. Then he said, her voice cracked. He said, Forgive me, Mary. You lived too much. Then he pushed me into the river. The courtroom froze. Even the judge exhaled quietly. Toby, sitting in the back, wiped his eyes. But the river refused me. Mary said softly, A fisherman found me. God gave me another chance. I came back and found my husband had taken everything. My company, my land, my name. And I stayed silent until I gathered proof. She held up a flash drive. Inside this are bank statements, land transfer files, and voice recordings of him admitting the fraud to his mistress. Julian's lawyer jumped up. Objection, my lord. This evidence. The judge raised a hand. Sit down. Let the woman finish. Mary's eyes glistened, but she didn't break. He thought I was gone. But I'm here, and I just want what's mine, my name, my peace, my mother's land. She sat down slowly. Silence again. The kind that shakes a room more than shouting ever could. Julian rose, trembling. My lord, I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. I panicked. The judge looked at him. You threw your wife into the lagoon, sir. I thought she was gone already. Julian cried. You wanted her gone, the judge snapped back. Reporters scribbled furiously. Julian's mask cracked completely. He began pacing, sweating, mumbling. She wouldn't stop talking about her mother's land. Everything was in her name. I just want to build something of my own. The judge leaned forward. So you took her life to build yours? Julian covered his face with his hands. I loved her. I swear I did. But love that kills is no love at all. After hours of testimony and cross-examination, the courtroom lights dimmed toward evening. Rain started again, light, tapping against the window panes. The judge cleared his throat. This court finds the defendant, Julian Adebayo, guilty of attempted murder, fraud, and falsification of documents. Julian's head dropped. Mary closed her eyes, one tear escaping. Toby whispered quiet, Thank you, God. This court hereby restores all assets, property, and business ownership to Mrs. Mary Adebayo. The judge continued, and orders the immediate freezing of all accounts held by the defendant. The gavel struck. Once, twice. Justice echoed through the room. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Questions flew like arrows. Madam Mary, how you feel? Will you forgive your husband? What message do you have for women in your situation? She paused at the top of the courthouse steps. The crowd below waiting. Then she said softly, Don't die for love. Love that costs your life isn't love. It's slavery. The crowd erupted in applause. Some wept. Some prayed aloud. She turned, walked into the waiting car with Toby, and closed the door. Inside, silence. She leaned back, exhausted. Toby looked at her. You did it, madam. You won. She smiled faintly. No, Toby. Truth won. I just survived long enough to tell it. By evening, the story was everywhere. Radio hosts debated it. Preachers quoted it. Women in markets whispered about the fat woman who came back from the lagoon. Some called her a miracle. Some called her mad. But everyone called her brave. In Suralere, her shop reopened under its true name, Grace's Touch Catering. Lines stretched outside the door. People came not just for food, but for faith, because every plate she served carried a story. That even death can't silence dignity. Julian, meanwhile, was moved to a holding cell. The cameras caught him being led away, handcuffed, head bowed. No more Igbata, no more charm, just a man stripped of everything he stole. His new world was cold concrete and regret. Weeks later, Mary received a letter. It came through the court mail from the prison. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, Mary, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I saw you in court and realized what love should have been. You were gold. I was dirt. If there's a next life, I hope God lets me serve you, not hurt you. Julian. Mary folded the letter slowly, placed it in a drawer, and locked it. She whispered to herself, Let the past stay buried. Then she turned to her window. Outside, the city lights of Lagos blinked like fireflies, restless, beautiful, alive. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, the air didn't taste like fear. A month later, Mary hosted a small gathering at her reopened shop. The same community that once whispered behind her back now came to celebrate her. There was music, laughter, and jollof rice that smelled like healing. Toby toasted with a glass of malt. To Madam Mary, the woman Lagos couldn't drown. Everyone cheered. Mary laughed, tears glistening. To truth, she said, because truth always floats, even in deep water. As night fell, the generator hummed, children danced, and the aroma of pepper soup filled the air. Mary stood outside, watching the city that had witnessed her death and her rebirth. For once, she felt full, not with food or money, but with peace. Later that night, she walked alone to the riverside, the same one that once tried to swallow her. She stood there, the breeze soft against her face. In her hand, she held the old wooden spoon her mother had given her, cracked, scarred, still whole. She whispered, Mama, I kept your promise. I fed people, and I fed myself strength. She tossed the spoon gently into the water. It floated, steady, sure, drifting away like a small boat of forgiveness. The river shimmered under the moonlight, and for the first time since that night, Mary smiled without pain. Lagos moved on, as it always does. The newspapers that once screamed Mary's name now chased the next scandal. But in a quiet corner of Surulere, behind a small gate painted sunflower yellow, Mary Adebayo rebuilt her world piece by piece. The name above her new shop read, Grace's Table, Home of True Taste. The first day she reopened, she stood at the doorway in a loose purple dress, her hair wrapped high, her apron clean and pressed. A few neighbors peeked through the fence, unsure. Would she smile again? Would she still cook like before? She did. The scent of fried plantain, pepper stew, and fresh bread floated into the street. Within an hour, her tables were full. Taxi drivers, nurses, students, even an old police officer. All came, not just for food, but for something deeper. To see the woman who refused to die. Every morning, Mary woke before dawn. She would light the stove, grind the pepper by hand, and hum the same hymn her mother used to sing. It is well with my soul. Her body still bore scars, faint marks across her shoulders and arms. But instead of hiding them, she wore sleeveless blouses. Scars were no longer shame. They were scripture. Toby now worked full-time with her, handling deliveries and the shop's new social media page. He loved calling her Boss Madam. Madam, we don't go viral, oh, he'd say, waving his phone. People day comment, say your stew fit wake the dead. Mary would laugh, shaking her head. A beg. Don't remind me about waking the dead. They'd both laugh harder, and for a moment, the past felt lighter. One afternoon, while wiping tables, Mary saw a man standing at the entrance. He wasn't a customer. He wore a faded brown jacket, carrying a small bag. He looked nervous. When their eyes met, he bowed slightly. Madam, do you remember me? Mary looked closer. Then she gasped softly. Chike. It was Chike, the fisherman who had found her body by the lagoon that night. The man who dragged her from death back to life. He smiled shyly. I was passing by, saw the signboard, Grace's Table. I thought maybe it's you. Mary rushed forward and hugged him tight. You saved my life. No, he said softly. God just used my hands. They sat, and she served him jollof with smoked fish. He ate slowly, humbly, eyes full of gratitude. Madam Mary, you were half dead when I saw you. I thought you won't make it. Sometimes I thought so, too, she replied. They both laughed quietly, like people who had seen the same night and lived to see the same dawn. Chike began visiting often, at first just for food and small talk. But slowly, something grew between them. Not romance, not yet, but something gentler. Trust. He was a simple man, a fisherman who worked the Lagos waters, who knew how to read the sky better than he could read a phone. Mary loved his simplicity. He never asked about her past. He only ever said, Madam, water no good enemy. It only reflects what's inside you. And when she asked what he meant, he said, The river showed me you weren't done living. Maybe now it's time to live properly. Sometimes they'd sit outside the shop after closing. The street would quiet down, the air heavy with the smell of charcoal and night. Toby would lock up and tease. And then, Madam and Fisherman again. I go soon by Asobi, oh. Mary would roll her eyes and smile. For the first time in years, she didn't mind being teased. But peace is never total. Julian's name still echoed in the news sometimes. His appeal had been rejected, but his lawyer kept filing motions. Mary avoided reading the papers, until one morning, Toby came running. Madam, looked his headline. It read, Convicted businessman Julian Adebayo suffers stroke in prison. Mary froze. She took the paper, read it silently. Julian was in a prison hospital, paralyzed on one side. Doctors said he might not walk again. For a long while, she said nothing. Then she whispered, Even the body rebels against wickedness. Toby watched her carefully. You feel pity? She sighed. Maybe. Maybe not. I just know that pain finds its way home. Weeks later, a letter arrived, stamped from the prison hospital. It was from the chaplain, not Julian. Madam Mary, Mr. Adebayo requests to see you before his health worsens. He says it's important. Mary read it 3 times. She didn't owe him a thing. But something inside her, maybe closure, maybe mercy, told her to go. So she did. The hospital wing smelled of bleach and decay. Julian lay in a small bed, tubes attached, one side of his face drooping. When he saw her, tears filled his eyes. "Mary!" She stood at a distance. "Why did you call me?" "Because I can't die without saying it. I was wrong. You were my blessing, and I treated you like a burden." Mary's face was calm, unreadable. "You threw your blessing into a river." Julian coughed weakly. "I see that now. Every night, I dream of that sound, the splash, the silence after." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mary said quietly, "I forgive you, but forgiveness isn't freedom. It's release. You'll still face what you did." He nodded, sobbing silently. She turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. "Julian," he looked up. "Yes, you once said I lived too much. But maybe that was my only crime." Then she left, and as she walked out into the sunlight, she felt lighter than she had in years. Months passed. Mary's business grew. She hired more workers, opened a second branch in Yaba. Her story had become a quiet symbol across Nigeria, discussed in women's groups, churches, and even schools. Be like Madam Mary, they'd say, strong, but soft enough to forgive. Toby started a small delivery company, inspired by her. Chike expanded his fishing supply line, sometimes bringing Mary fresh catch for free. And somewhere between those shared deliveries and evening teas, love finally tiptoed in. It wasn't sudden, no dramatic confessions, no flowers. Just 2 people who had seen darkness, choosing light together. One night, as they sat watching the sunset over the lagoon, Chike said, "You know, that river took your pain and gave you back your peace." Mary smiled. "Then maybe I should thank it." He laughed softly. "No, just keep living. That's thanks enough." The story of Mary Adebayo slowly became legend, told by street preachers, whispered by bus drivers, quoted in Facebook posts. But she didn't chase fame. She just kept feeding people. Every bowl of soup she served was her sermon. Children loved her. Old women blessed her. And sometimes, young wives came quietly to her shop, whispering, "Madam Mary, I saw what they did to you. You gave me courage to leave." She would touch their hands and say, "Don't leave with hate. Leave with hope." That was her new gospel. Leave with hop. One quiet night, after closing, Mary sat by her window. Rain drummed softly on the roof. She watched the droplets slide down the glass, each one a reminder that even storms have rhythm. She thought of everything. The bridge, the river, the courtroom, Julian's trembling voice, her mother's old spoon, Chike's laughter. All of it woven together like fabric. Ugly, beautiful, human. Toby's voice came from outside. "Madam, generator done off." "Leave it," she replied. "Let's rest in the dark tonight. I want to hear the rain." And in that darkness, she whispered to herself, "I didn't survive to prove anything. I survived to live." Lightning flashed briefly through the window, her face glowing in its silver light. Calm. Home. It had been 5 years since that night at the lagoon. The night Lego swallowed a woman and gave her back reborn. The world had changed around her, but Mary Adebayo had learned something rare. That peace doesn't arrive with noise. It comes quietly, like dawn sneaking over a tired city. It was morning again in Surulere. Children were chasing each other through the narrow street, vendors shouting prices, and the smell of akara filled the air. Mary stood in front of her shop, Grace's table, now freshly painted in white and gold. The new signboard carried a slogan beneath her name, "Food with a Story." She adjusted her headscarf and smiled as Toby arrived on his motorbike, carrying fresh vegetables. "Madam, Market People Day greet you," he shouted. "Tell them make dem rest small," she replied, laughing. Her laughter had changed. Once tight and nervous, now it flowed free, full, rich. She had built not just a business, but a small world, a place where broken people came to eat, rest, and believe again. Inside the shop hung photographs, not celebrities or politicians, but of everyday faces. A nurse who beat cancer, a mechanic who started night school, a widow who learned tailoring. Under each photo, she had written a small quote. Under hers, the words read, "I lived twice, once before pain and once after forgiveness." It started as a small idea. One afternoon, a young girl selling oranges outside the shop had shyly asked, "Auntie Mary, can I eat leftover rice?" Mary gave her a plate, but when she asked where the girl went to school, the girl had said, "I no go school. My papa say money no day." That night, Mary couldn't sleep. So she began the Grace Foundation, a small community kitchen and weekend literacy program for poor children. By the second year, it had grown into a proper center, with benches, chalkboards, and volunteers. Even Toby taught math on Saturdays, pretending to be strict. When a journalist visited to do a documentary, she asked Mary, "Madam, what made you start this?" Mary smiled and replied, "Because I was once hungry, not for food, but for love." One hot afternoon, Mary received a letter again, this time from the prison chaplain. Julian Adebayo had passed away. A stroke, quietly in his sleep. For a moment, she stood still. Then she folded the letter, placed it on her table, and stared through the open window. No tears came, not out of coldness, but out of closure. That night, she walked the lagoon, the same place where her story had changed forever. The water shimmered under the moonlight. She threw a small white flower into it and whispered, "I forgive you again this time for the last time." The flower floated gently, spinning in circles before drifting away. Mary watched until it disappeared, then smiled through the breeze. It was over. Chike stood behind her, holding 2 cups of steaming tea. "You always come here when you're thinking." "It helps me breathe," she said softly. "What did the water say tonight?" "That pain ends when we stop chasing revenge." He nodded quietly. Then he handed her the second cup. "For warmth," he said. Their love had never needed labels or ceremony. It was the kind that didn't shout, it whispered. And in those whispers, they had found something stronger than passion, peace. Later that year, they got married quietly. Not in a hall, not on Instagram, but under a tree behind a new school building. Only close friends, the children, and one pastor attended. When he asked if she took Chike as her husband, she smiled and said, "I take him as my second chance." The children cheered. Toby cried more than anyone else. Years rolled by. Legos kept moving. New roads, new governors, new gossip. But people still spoke of Madam Mary, the woman who forgave the river. Her shop expanded to 3 branches. Her foundation fed hundreds weekly, and her story became a part of school moral lessons. One day, a young journalist visited again and asked, "Madam Mary, if you could tell young women one thing, what would it be?" She paused, smiled softly, and replied, "Don't let your weight make you think you're less. Don't let love make you think you're small. The right person will never make you shrink to fit." The interviewer nodded, tears in her eyes. Mary reached across and held her hand. "Remember, child, real strength is not shouting. It's waking up and still choosing kindness." On her 50th birthday, Toby surprised her with something big. He had collected old clips, news stories, and photos, and turned them into a short documentary titled "The Woman Who Refused to Die." When it played on a projector, everyone went silent. The film showed her journey, from pain to power. By the end, even Chike was crying. Toby whispered to her, "You gave me a life, madam. I just want to give you a story." Mary hugged him tightly. "You gave me both," she said. Before bed that night, Mary walked to her small garden. In the center stood a small wooden sculpture, a woman standing tall beside water, holding a bowl. Chike had carved it himself. At its base, he had engraved, "Grace never drowns." Mary knelt beside it, tracing the words with her fingers. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "not for saving me from the water, but for teaching me how to walk above it. The wind blew softly, brushing her cheeks like a blessing. The city woke slowly. The muezzins' call mingled with church bells, traffic horns with bird songs, a messy symphony only Legos could play. At the market, women spread their mats. At the bus stop, hawkers shouted, "Ajid's bread." And somewhere in the heart of it all, a small kitchen opened its doors again, Grace's table. Mary stood at the counter, now silver hair but radiant. A little boy tugged at her dress. "Grandma Mary, I want extra stew." "Ah, you think stew is free?" she teased. "Please, Grandma." "All right, but promise to share." She scooped a little more into his bowl and smiled. That smile, the same one that had survived betrayal, death, and rebirth, now belonged to everyone who walked through her door. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Mary sat outside her shop, watching the golden light fade over the rooftops. Chike joined her, his hand resting gently over hers. Children laughed in the distance, and the smell of stew drifted through the air. She turned to him and whispered, "I used to think my story ended in that river." He smiled. "No, that was only the first chapter. And this is forever." They sat in silence as the sky turned orange and then soft blue. In that stillness, everything felt whole, not perfect, not painless, but whole. Mary closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The city hummed. The world kept moving. And somewhere deep in her chest, light finally settled, warm, steady, eternal.